Well, hello, everybody, again. It's great to be here today. We've got a special guest, our first guest to the Enlightened Investor, Dr. Amit Sinha. So Dr. Amit is one of my colleagues at Bradley University. He is a professor. He's a CFA from India. He's now moved into the dark side, the administration. He's helping the College of Business move forward with accreditation. But you know, you're in here for we have a great subject matter expert with Amit. He's published heavily in peer-reviewed academic journals with regards to all kinds of things in finance, including some areas in biases. But he's forecasting, Monte Carlo simulation, predictive analysis. Amit also is a journal editor like me. So if we ever look like we have dark eyes, it's because we've been reading articles all night and like helping to improve the literature as our profession, and I really respect Amit for doing that. His journal he publishes is the Financial Statistical Journal, and I've seen that one, and it's actually incredible to see how many people from all over the world are publishing that journal. So that's really great to see. Amit's taught all over the world. Just one more thing, he's taught all over the world. He's taught even in Frankfurt, Germany, at one of their business schools here. So, I really appreciate you spending some time with us today, Amit. We're just going to have a conversation today about some biases, cognitive biases, behavioral issues. And one thing I just learned from you today is how recently, finance has been an area of study in education, as well as just behavioral finance. So I think we're in for a good show today, Mike.
I'm looking forward to it. I didn't realize that academia had a dark side too. I thought you were going to say that he worked for a brokerage firm or something, or a wirehouse. So you have a dark side in academia as well.
Academia is the dark side.
Well, I'm not sure if Ben Franklin would say that, but anyways, keep going.
Right. Yeah, great.
I'm very appreciative of you calling me and the first guest. I mean, that's an incredible.
Yes, yeah, first guest. We should have like a gift or a prize. We have nothing to even hand out yet. We have to work on that, John.
Come on.
Oh, we got some coffee.
We have cider smoke.
We'll get you a mug.
Love it.
Good.
So you want to start us off with the
I
first
will.
question? Kind of give us some
Sure.
perspective?
So really, starting out, I mean, I think, Amit can get into this deeper, but we're wired for failure. When you take a look at our emotional and cognitive biases and our biological history and our functional thinking, we go way back. I mean, they're saying that our history starts roughly some 200,000 years ago. Our first cities were 11,000 years ago. Our first financial markets were 2,500 years ago in Mesopotamia. And then our first stock and bond markets were only 400 years ago. And yet our biological brains were evolved over this whole time period where we were out in the plains, we were hunter-gatherers, and they were designed to protect us. And that brain doesn't do well in the modern world. And, he brought along Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, Professor Nobel Prize, awesome book, System 1 and 2 Thinking. I'll let you talk about that. So I guess the first question is, can you explain the differences in thinking fast and slow and how that applies to our decision making? And I'll just mention thinking fast and slow is like the fast thinking is kind of our gut and our intuition, whereas the slow is the logical, rational thinking.
Oh, thank you. It's interesting how you started off with the evolutionary aspect of our of humans. I published a paper maybe four years ago. It's called Asymmetric Reaction as Rational Behavior, and this part is not in the paper itself, but when I was presenting at the conferences, I would mention that as hunter and gatherers, if you think about, if you're told, if you're hungry and you know where to look, where the food is, you might want to go there. But if somebody told you that if you go there, you're going to get eaten by a tiger, very likely you're not going to go there. But of course, nowadays we don't have the same risk about, when we go gather food, we might get eaten up and become food ourselves. So there is a little bit of that perspective in ourselves about risk taking or risk avoidance that is always there, but that's translated into some other type of issues that we face. Now, there's no a saber tiger on Wall Street, but
Well, there's sharks there.
Well,
There's sharks
it's also
there.
the modern day saber-tooth tiger, though. Wall Street. That's what he's alluding to.
So-
Yeah, I get it.
So, but in terms of the specific question that you had asked, and thinking fast and slow, we train people such that they actually think slowly. So if you put in the number of hours, your decision making might become so automated that the decision making process itself slows down for the person making that decision, such that a better decision could be made. And I'll put another anecdote here. This is from one of my colleagues here in our business school at Bradley. He says that when he sometimes teaches, he reflects on his teaching as if he is imagining the teaching. He's teaching while he's teaching, he's imagining his class and sees himself teaching and the students learning. And he says that when he is able to do that, he is able to slow down the whole thinking process and is able to observe other small details that he normally does not observe when he's actually teaching, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's the part of slowing down the decision, that you might notice more and notice better or more relevant factors, that if you were to rush into making that judgment may not be the best judgment to make. Another example that I want to bring from this book, and I think he mentioned somewhere, in terms of when you're trying to hire someone, you get so many resumes, and hopefully they are all well qualified. But he says when he was trying to recommend a process for hiring someone in the Army, he says, look at their resume, close your eyes, and imagine if that person would fit into this job. That's really slowing down the decision-making process. And part of the decision-making process also is whether we want to be fully based on data or the intuition. In the way my thinking has evolved on this is that we spend so much time thinking just of the data that we actually ignore intuition to our detriment. And the data should really be shaping the intuition. And if that happens, you're probably going to get a better informed judgment about, at least when you're thinking about the future in terms of human behavior or financial decision making. We also have to understand, why is this important? And the reason why we want to think about this consider this to be important is that when we make financial decisions, a lot of the financial decisions is about the future. And so while you want to have that data, but that data is historical, and if you are going to ignore the intuition and not let the data derive that intuition when you are thinking about the future, there is going to be problems in the decision making.
So would you agree that when you look at data, that it helps, we discussed this in the last video, is using base rates and looking at odds of success to kind of help form decisions, is looking at what the odds of success are for different strategies or data that you're looking at?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And again, as my knowledge of understanding of finance has evolved, when I first started out as my first introduction in finance was, if things are random, how are we going to make predictions? And now my perspective has changed. We want it to be random. We want it to be stochastic and probabilistic, so that we can assign unbiased probabilities for the outcome. If we can do that, then we can get
I love that. That's going to be another topic.
Yep.
Randomness, people, because I think uncertainty and randomness is truly one we could go into as well.
And I want to mention another thing with that is that I published a paper with Journal of Forecasting in April this year, where I did a little bit of simulation, where the idea was using the historical data to make a prediction or a likely outcome, or get a sense of what the future would be, and then simulating what that future would be. And so you could get a better sense of what the outcome most likely,
Right.
if you can do that.
Narrow that dispersion.
Yes. And then if you can assign the probability of outcomes for all those possible outcomes, you can get a better decision.
Awesome. So for the last 100 years, and I think we talked about this before we went on camera, the economic finance is thought about us as being rational agents who carefully and logically weighed the pros and cons of every decision. And in reality, emotions such as fear, greed, envy, and regret wreak havoc on our decision making. And every day, we see people lining up to buy lottery tickets. We see people gambling at casinos. We see salespersons taking advantage of people selling products that are geared towards fear, and they got high commissions. They're geared towards the salesman's greed, etc. And that's a whole new study of finance called behavioral finance, which is what these biases are within. And with that, we're going to have Joshua start to answer some questions. I'm going to let the smart guys talk now, and I'm going to back away.
Yeah. All right, fiduciary.
Yeah, right.
So this question is coming from making big decisions and sort of behavioral finance. And I was thinking about a way for our audience to kind of get some perspective on this. And what we find is that oftentimes some of our big decisions, they just mess with our biases, our emotions, and our guts. And I'm thinking about automobiles. I recently bought an automobile, maybe a couple of years ago, but I was shocked, guys. I was shocked that a new automobile, according to Experian, is $41,000 for the average new car. Now get this, of the individuals that actually end up buying a new car, the average borrowing loan is $35,211 over 7 years. So, don't forget, guys, that if you're rational about this thing, you're like, hey, my car just lost 50% of its value in the first 4 or 5 years after I drove it off the lot. So, I guess my question is, we make a lot of big assumptions when we make big purchases like cars and homes, and we can make some big mistakes in there, and we oftentimes do. Is that explainable in behavioral finance? How do we? Does it just overwhelm our? You were talking about data, and then you were also talking about gut. What's going on there for the average, household that when they make these big decisions, they come away with a $41,000 car?
Well, actually, that's a pretty good question, and a relevant one, because we all have to go through this decision making process. And when you make these kind of decisions, there's two things. One obviously, looking ahead and making some kind of personal forecast or personal projections for yourself. Making those assumptions in itself is perhaps the right way to approach it, because if you want to think about buying a $40,000 car and you are really interested in going about doing it the right way, you certainly would want to pay that off. So do you have the earning capacity to pay that off? And so then, another perspective to think about it is that we are getting, as humans, we are trying to have an experience, and at a different stage in life, we want to make certain types of decision. Like, for example, you wouldn't want your kid in middle school to make a decision about buying a car, but you might want your kid to make a decision about which sports they want to get involved in. And later on, when you can afford to make the decision about a car, or you're experienced enough, then that's the point that you would make. Because at that point, you can make that sort of assumptions that, oh, I am at that point in life and I have that stability in my job and this is my earning potential. And if I can manage this little amount of cut to pay off towards the mortgage or towards the car loan, I'm in good shape.
I hope that's what people are thinking.
Yes,
I'm not sure if that's always the case, but
I agree. I agree with you that's not always the case, because there's
How low is the monthly payment?
not just that, and also keeping up with the Joneses.
Well, that too.
it's shiny.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Shiny. I want it.
Yeah,
You gotta have that Lexus.
yeah. So
Ford Mustang for Mike.
yeah. So I did that.
That's good. That's
Okay.
good. I appreciate that, and and it's interesting too. Like the American household only earns like $55,000-$60,000 a year, so that's a big.
The per capita.
So
is
yeah,
that,
it's a big. Let's talk a little bit about overconfidence. I think Mike and I were talking one time. Like sometimes people fall down uphill. They just they have this confidence about them, and they just progress and they improve and they get very successful. But doesn't mean they have got a lot up here. And I think that relates also to investing. Like people that are really smart, have high IQs. Maybe people are successful businessmen, businesswomen that started their own business and say, "Hey, look what I've accomplished." How can that overconfidence lead to some bad judgments when it comes to investing?
Oh, yeah. That can lead to a lot of bad that overconfidence. But keeping in line with the fear of making a bad judgment is a risk in itself, and that can also be very detrimental. But specifically to the question that you mentioned about if you're highly accomplished in your field, like
Why doesn't it translate?
yeah, it shouldn't translate.
Right.
For example, if I'm sick, down with some disease, I wouldn't necessarily go to my financial advisors. What medicine would I take so that I'm, that would just seem laughable, but if you think of some highly accomplished individual, their accomplishment comes from a particular skill set, and almost all skill sets require some amount of decision making. And people think that, oh, if I can make these decisions in this field, why isn't it easy for me to transfer that decision?
Exactly. I see that with entrepreneurs a lot.
Yes, and
it doesn't work in finance and Wall Street.
Yes, and especially if there's a totally different skill set. If you want to be an active trader or you want to have a passive investment strategies, two different skill sets. And oftentimes, and this is what I tell my students in my classes, you guys are finance students, but you're not making money directly by making money for yourself. You're making money indirectly by helping other people's making money for them. And that's why, because you can make the money for other people, they would come to you, be satisfied with your work, and then give you the compensation that you deserve. And it translates similarly to some, if I am going to my doctor and he's always, if I am sick with a viral something and he prescribes a cancer medication, I'm not going to go to that doctor the second time around. You get the point?
Sure.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks so much there. Anything else, Mike, you want to say on overconfidence? Because I know you've got a lot of stories, my man.
Oh, I think overconfidence goes along with recency bias because, basically people, it's easy to look backwards, right? Hindsight, 2020 is perfect when you're looking backwards. And they take hindsight, they project it forward, use overconfidence, and it's a recipe for disaster. Odds of success. Maybe they may get lucky, right? And it works. But
Yep.
Yeah, that does play. And in terms of the modeling for that behavior, what happens, and this is, I think, Kindleberger, if I'm pronouncing his name, he wrote a book about manias and bubbles. And so what happens, and I think I mentioned this at the start, that if you think of the agricultural market and the new fruit is coming in, people would try and gravitate towards that to buy that fruit because it's fresh. It's the first output of the season. And people want to get a taste of that. And so that behavior might even translate when you come up with a new product or a new. And if you think of the dot-com bubble, there was a point where just bringing a dot-com firm, the valuation of that was so much that people want to just jump into it.
Right.
Yeah, so that I can make money while it's going, even though the cash flows and the valuation would never justify that.
Yeah, we got that today with SPACs and
that
other
leads
things,
to,
right?
well, we talked about this earlier off camera before we started with this Kathy Woods. She's all the rage with this innovation ETF.
ARC fund.
And it started in October 14. The annualized return since inception was like 34%. As of May. I think the Wall Street Journal had an article on this, but the actual investor annualized return was 5%.
Yeah, so
They showed up late to the party.
Yeah, what happens is that the insiders, not necessarily insider trading, but people who have the expertise in the field, they see this, they make the money, and slowly start withdrawing. But the other people who say, "Oh, those people are making that much money, maybe if I jump in, I would be able to make that much money as well." By that time, the party is already over.
Oh, yeah, it's gone on. The bus has moved on.
Yep.
Fear of missing out, though, got to get in. Well, and also hindsight bias, what we're talking about.
Man, you sound like an expert there, Mike.
No, I'm not an expert. I'm with the experts today. Expert at seeing it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have Ryan, our producer, put up a financial bias slide for us here. And Mike and I put this together of 8 commonly referenced financial biases. So the academic literature in behavioral economics and behavioral finance has shown that there are several types of known cognitive and behavioral biases when it comes to our money and investing that money. So, and you can see here, like, we put together 8. If you kind of go clockwise, there's recency bias. Like our memory has bias favoring recent events. And, Mike loves the confirmation bias. In I think it was our second or first video, we talked about trench. We oftentimes find ourselves in a trench. We look around for things that confirm our what we're looking at. The home bias. I really, living in Peoria, Illinois, we have one of our major employers here is Caterpillar, right? And there's a lot of individuals in Peoria that put their human capital and their financial capital in the same, and their real estate capital in the same bucket, in the Caterpillar bucket. And that goes true for like Coca-Cola and
Every city has their company.
Yeah, in Atlanta, right? Every city has their and it goes on from there, from active bias. And we talked about how Eugene Fama says with his soap quote. What does he say, Mike? He says, "The more you handle it."
Portfolio's like a bar of soap. The more you touch it, the smaller it gets.
Yeah. So you have to do something, right? And that's that's active bias. And sometimes we find that doing nothing is the right thing to do, right?
Well, yeah. And also I want to add, professional money managers that manage funds or ETFs or their portfolios, or even advisors, that we all are prone to these same biases. It's not just investors. Everybody is. We're all human.
Yep. And so this goes all the way, if you kind of go in a clockwise direction, the last one there is the cognitive dissonance. That's, people don't like to hear unpleasant truths. And I think that's one of Mike's, that's a head scratcher all the time for you.
Well, yeah, and we kind of alluded to that in the last video too, right? Our fabric, our identity, our egos,
Our egos.
Rubs us the wrong way.
Yep.
Pride.
So, there's a lot of, there are great stories we could tell in all these, Amit, and I'm going to ask you, even money managers are susceptible to these, but, from a financial standpoint, which one of these might be the most detrimental? I'm not sure if you can even rank that, or you have any, which one could be the most detrimental to the average, retail investor?
Purely from the portfolio formation perspective, I think it's the home bias that I would really worry about. That plays a big part, because if you think of the concept of the portfolio. It is about increasing your diversification. And
Right.
and when you're looking at diversification, you want to look at, and the math just works out.
Numbers work out.
Yeah, that if you, and I don't have a piece of paper or whatever to put the formula up there. That it's not even necessary to put the formula up, but there's that correlation coefficient. If you want to invest in a portfolio, you want to have better diversified stock. The portfolio has to be diversified, and that diversification comes in when you're looking at stocks that are not correlated positively. And the way the formula works out is that if you have negative correlation, the overall risk does mathematically just goes down. And then if you think about how do you want to translate that in English language? Say if you invest in 50 stocks in one industry, is that diversification? Probably not. Mm-hmm. So if you just invest in 20 different industries in one country, that's better than the first choice. But if you want to invest across the globe, then it is possible that the correlations in between the ingredients of your portfolio, some of them might be have a negative correlation, such that over a period of time you've achieved the purpose of that portfolio by reducing the risk. And one has to always remember that taking risk is not bad. I mean, you have to take risk.
Yeah.
The saying as it goes, higher risk, higher the expected return. And by diversifying, you are increasing the chances of that expectation. We get the feeling that to get high return, all we have to do is take high risk. If you come from that perspective, that's where the perspective is, oh, I'm just going to buy this lottery ticket and I'm going to win. Mm-hmm. That never happens. And so translating that into the home bias situation is, I'm very familiar with what goes on in my country. I'm familiar with the politics. I may not like it, but I'm familiar. I'm familiar with the laws. I need to uphold those laws, or other people are going to make sure that these group of people upholds these laws. And the language, I'm familiar with the language, but if we move from my home country, I can get very scared. I don't know the language. I don't know the rules and regulations. Even though theoretically it might make sense that I want to invest in stocks of, say, a different country. So in terms of the portfolio management, that home bias is very important.
Yeah, I see that a lot. People struggle with having international. And what's amazing, though, is people didn't have much struggle last decade when international well outperformed U.S. But now this decade, international is trailing U.S. and it's come up more often, question-wise. But there's a lot of advisors that are biased that don't even use international.
And so some of that you would also see the political uncertainty, the global political uncertainty. This is much higher now than it was in the 1990s. So there was and that plays part as well. Another thing with this slide that you might also want to take into perspective is that some of these biases are not absolute, and people tend to kind of trade off between these biases as well. So, for example, there's an optimism bias and there's a regret bias. In a perspective, they are totally opposite in direction. Optimism biases might make you take decisions that you may not take or should not take, and regret bias prevents you from, or you thinking that I shouldn't have taken that decision. There's also a trade-off there. So something in
we are complicated beings when it comes to our thinking.
Yeah.
Yes.
Personally, I home bias is number one, as I would agree probably as well. But I think right there with it would be recency and confirmation, just because it's just so human nature. And then we also have the media just bombarding us with all the latest trends and what's hot and what's cold, et cetera. And it's really, like I mentioned with hindsight bias, we look backwards then as well, and the recency we project it forward, and it's just human nature.
Yeah.
Yep. We're complicated creatures. I like
tough
that.
one.
That's a great quote. And thanks for those words of wisdom.
Which is why what he mentioned, in the end, it's diversification, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so this is also, I just mentioned about the high risk, high return. I that's one of the paradigms that I teach in my investment class, that if you want to have with this attitude that just taking high risk is going to give you high return, that's a recipe for disaster. You should be willing to take risk, but expecting that just doing that.
Compensated risk.
Yes. So you want to take that risk and then figure out how you would manage that risk. And so some of these issues that comes about is that we get a little anxious about the decision making in that perspective, because it's looking into the future, and it's an unknown. And just imagine when those pioneers and the people who were settling the West, it was just unknown. And so some amount of that fear and that risk, about risk, is just not normal human behavior.
No, we don't like uncertainty.
Yeah.
We want certainty. Sure. What's next?
So, Mike, this is a good one for me to ask. I guess it's behavioral finance a little bit, and it's even religious or biblical. Like it's good to get a lot of input before you make a decision. And when it comes to making financial decisions, how important is it to walk along, have a mentor that walks alongside you, or have a financial advisor? Which one of these biases do you think that an advisor could help the average retail investor kind of be leery of, as well as when you teach your classes on investments, do you have any data that shows like if you have an advisor, like it's actually worth or a mentor, they can help you by this amount? I mean, I know it's kind of hard to put in a quantitative value on it, but how valuable is a mentor when it comes to taking in consideration these behavioral and cognitive biases before we make a decision? I mean, one quick story. Like, I had a friend who's a financial advisor, and one of his clients lives right next door to me, and my next door neighbor came home with like a brand new like Dodge pickup. And then I said, hey, do you see like my neighbor's got the new pickup? He said, yeah. Kind of scratched his head. That's gonna set him back a year or two or something like that from our goals. But you see, like he had the client's interest at heart. It's gonna set us back from his goals. So he had his goals in mind. So how valuable is it to have a mentor or a financial advisor?
It's very important. It's very just like with any other sphere in life, a mentor can really make life easy. But we, as a mentor, sometimes you're gonna have to just let the person be, and let the person fall and get hurt, and maybe that's when they would be ready to hear or learn the lessons that.
We're seeing our failures are very helpful.
Yes. But the mentor's job in any field, I mean, Joshua, you're a faculty, you teach, but really, do you teach or do you mentor? So the role of academics has, I think, evolved. I mean, if we are not mentoring now, we are not teaching. And so in one way or the other, you're doing. And so that perspective also is there for in the financial advisors. I don't have specifically the numbers I can
add some data.
Good.
So Vanguard has a study out. There's a number of companies that have, Morningstar has data as well, and they all run about the same. But Vanguard says that advisors add up to 3% alpha, advisor alpha. Yeah. Of that, half of it is behavioral.
Got it.
And that would make sense. And anecdotally, even if I didn't know the number, financial advisors exist because they serve a purpose. If they didn't serve a purpose, they wouldn't be there. Why would anyone go to these advisors? So just with that, I think they are very useful. They play a very good role. And so, some of these, for example, if you have a client who says, hey, the stock market dropped 5% yesterday. I want to get out of this stock market. This advisor would say no.
Sure.
Yeah. And so that's part of the mentoring process. And if one is a 5% drop and I want to get out of this such that tomorrow is going to get drop another 5. Nobody knows how much is going to drop by tomorrow. But if you look at the graphs over 10 years, the stock market has always gone up. And so that's part of the mentoring.
Positive trend with a random walk, right?
Yeah.
You've got an article on that. I know you do, Amit. I got one more question for you, buddy. And this one's about your own kind of life. Let's get personal here. The question is, it's hard. I told a story on one of our earlier episodes about my dad's a doctor, but couldn't diagnose his own self, right? And I think it's easier.
Now we're going to diagnose Amit.
Yes, let's have Amit turn his powerful, visionary on his own self here. Is how do you, in your own life, how do you control your own, these things, right? Those biases. What do you do, and what can the average, investor do to kind of control their own biases? Can they see them? Is it hard? Can you see them, or do you also have this cognitive dissonance that Mike talks about so much?
Do you have a magnifying glass that I can take a look at?
I do, yeah. Lay down here on the couch.
Yeah, the couch.
Out
front, in the front office.
Discussion. Yeah. Right.
I think that's...
Tell me about your childhood. Not kidding. That's where we go there. That's where we pick up a lot.
That reminds me. It's interesting,
Here we go.
That prompted something that I think eventually has led me to finance. My grandmother, my late grandmother, used to tell me a story. I don't remember this story. And I was less than 5. And we had gone shopping. And she told me that I was telling my mother, "Mom, why don't you give me your purse? You are not going to be able to manage all that money." I don't remember that story. I mean, I don't remember saying that. I remember my grandmother telling me that repeatedly. So it's funny, isn't it?
I thought you were headed, because we talked about this in the last one about as far as, we develop a lot of our money scripts and biases when we grow up. And not only in our home life, but also think about it depends on the market. If you have a roaring market when you're growing up as a teenager, maybe you think the market's fantastic. Whereas if you were a teenager and you grew up in a period when the market was getting crushed, you got a totally different view of the market. I think that's probably true even with the millennials today. We have to get our producers' perspective on that.
Yeah,
I'm really diverging off of what we're talking about.
But I wanted to tell that story because that kind of led me to when I got into finance.
Yes, we're going to lay on the couch.
There was that prediction that I was, some
Mom's
tendency
purse.
I was showing, But anyway.
Where are we?
How I manage, I think I have simplified my financial decision making. So
for your own cognitive load, or why did you simplify it?
Well, let's.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, I think that there's two things to that. Why I did it because my needs were rather simple, or I've simplified my needs and that's being very consistent with the approach that people should take in terms of managing their money. And I think before we got onto this taping session, we were talking about money is not an end in itself, but rather the means to an end. And so I focus more on that, the means to an end, than rather the end in itself. And some of that behavior, some of that perspective translates onto the other side as well. Just to give you an example, that some of the research that we do takes a lot of time and a lot of patience. And what I am thinking that sometimes I get frustrated. It's not happening quickly enough. It's not happening fast enough. Kind of the active bias. I want to have to do this quickly. I want to, And I said, no, Amit, slow down. These things are not meant to happen quickly. You got to take your time. And so it's the same perspective that I've tried to bring into my other spheres of life, as well as in the financial decision making. I mean, I don't worry about, although sometimes I do look at my retirement portfolio and on a regular basis just to see the numbers, but I just tell myself that it is just numbers. You're not going to do anything about it. You have so many years for earning and so many years till retirement. Focus on what you want to do. You want to, after retirement or during this period till the retirement, get into the habits that you want to work on after retirement. So I think that focusing on those aspects are way more important than keeping a day-to-day that, oh, this is what I... Now you also have to think about that not everyone, not all of your viewers would be in the same situation financially that I am. And for a lot of people, managing day to day, they may not have the luxury to think beyond that. And so there would be a different skill set that people need to have to manage that kind of situation as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that double perspective, taking the long run approach. I think that's smart, and being patient, as well as, seeing that you have a variety of individuals that have different, pulls at their financial wallets and purses than others, and just some people are living day by day. So I appreciate that.
Another perspective I want to add, this is in terms of the behavior, and that behavior translates also in the financial decision making. And this is one of my friends at Caterpillar. He got into a managerial position where he was to look and manage other people, the operations and administrations, and he wasn't enjoying it because he didn't have the long perspective in that role. And there were some other colleagues of his, and another colleague of his, and she was very good at, oh, I got to do this, I got to take care of this, I'm going to get focused on getting done. Oh, I'm just about to finishing this, I got to take care of that. She's there taking care of it. He didn't have that attitude. So there's that lifestyle and perspective that comes in, and that also affects that an individual's financial decision making.
Better to focus on what you can control.
Yeah.
Which is sometimes hard.
Yeah. What other questions do you have for Amit, Mike?
Well, I think the last one, as far as it's kind of alluded to in the first question about how he does it, but I guess we could give everybody, the viewers, whether they're just starting out as investors or whether you're a high net worth, very successful investor, is that you can overcome a lot of the biases as a manager, as an advisor, as an investor. If you have, first you have to have a plan based upon your needs, ability, willingness to take risk. Be aware of what's really important to you when you develop that plan. And then have a systematic process in your portfolio plan that removes bias. And so if you've got, your asset allocation set, and you have your rebalancing band set, and you're going to tax lost harvest, and that's your portfolio, and you're going to keep it that way, unless your need, ability, or willingness to assume risk changes, you've got a systematic process in place that removes all the biases.
I would agree with that.
Rather than just soup du jour, tragedy du jour, follow the Wall Street Journal, buy, sell, gold, crypto, small internet. It's crazy. The media just constantly throws stuff at you.
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, the media's role is that.
Clicks. They need clicks.
Yes.
By the way, we need clicks. Click YouTube.
Oh yeah.
But one of the things that I wanted to think of, earlier we were talking about that wanting to get food, and there's a saber-toothed tiger that can eat you. The role of media here is to inform that possibility of existence of a saber tooth. So in a lot of sense, we should keep in mind that they are by and large doing their job. When we get affected by it, that's what we want to be careful about. And that's where some of the other recency and active bias situations that are coming in. You want to know that there is a terrible weather pattern that is coming through that might devastate, might cause flooding. Now, if not knowing that might itself be a problem. But the flooding doesn't happen everywhere all at the same time. And so not everybody is going to be affected by that market news the same way all the time. And that's where the perspective of trying to slow down and doing away with that active bias to the recent news,
Well, what you alluded to earlier, with smart people, entrepreneurs, people that have had success in their lives, it's because they've had that active bias and they've changed and they zigged and they zagged. And that works well in the corporate world or in your business world, but it doesn't work well in the financial markets.
Well, especially when you require a whole lot of patience and active bias.
So I think we need to have Amit back, talk about randomness, but we're going to head maybe in the next video series, we'll get into the actual nuts and bolts of a plan, what a plan looks like. What do you think about when you put a plan? And then that gets into modeling. And then we can maybe, when we get into modeling, we talk about randomness. We have Amit come back and we can fire up the Monte Carlo and talk about randomness.
Yeah, he's our Monte Carlo expert here.
I'm sure he is.
Yeah.
I'm sure you both are.
Well, Mitt, man, it's been great having you today. We appreciate you spend some time with us and the viewers. There's a lot of words of wisdom, I think, that you could take away from patience, all these biases we have. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
And the reason for the show is, ladies and gentlemen, obviously, the Enlightened Investor is to educate the common individual so that they can make better, effective decisions on their asset allocations and walk away with a better plan in place. If you did enjoy today's content, Mike kind of gave us a little, gave a shout. Give us a thumbs up. Please share this information. Share a video with your friends or family. Subscribe. Ryan, myself, and Mike, we put together a blog out there. It's actually a website. It's enlightened-investor.com. We are updating that constantly, and we're going to put some resources out there as well as in the description below this video. So along with Dr. Amit Sinha, Mike, thank you. Thank you for being here today.
One of our longer ones this week, but it was a good one.
Thank you. I'm happy to do it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Glad to do it.
Awesome. We're out. Take care.